Thanks for joining us for CBN News Today. I'm Charlene Aaron. Just days after what some called the blizzard of 2015, another storm is barreling across the U.S. And once again, it's headed for New England, where many neighborhoods still haven't been able to dig out from the last winter blast. Dale Hurd has the story.
It's the second part of a brutal 1-2 punch. Snow, ice, and wicked cold that just won't quit. It smashed through Denver Wednesday, causing more than 40 accidents during the morning commute. Just east of Nebraska, it caused whiteout conditions over the roads while dumping over a half-foot of snow. Minnesota saw 186 crashes in just 6 hours. And in New York, temperatures began to warm, and that led to dangerous chunks of falling ice from the World Trade Center. In the city of Chicago, they're still digging out from the last storm, and according to residents, not doing a very good job of it.
It's a mess, and it's a shame that it's still like this.
City plows are still trying to catch up after the first storm dumped nearly 20 inches on the city. Elsie Richardson needed all the help she could get.
I got stuck on this trip today once before. It's the second time in this one trip.
And in Boston, frustration is growing as the city struggles to clear the streets.
I'm a little dismayed that, they went and did spend some resources on cleaning up downtown as opposed to getting some of the other neighborhoods cleared.
And Old Man Winter has a third act, what could be a bigger storm Sunday night and Monday. More heavy snow was expected over New England today to add to the heavy snow still on the ground from the last storm. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
The United States and NATO are beefing up their support for Ukraine. The U.S. is committing close to $16 million for humanitarian aid, and the Obama administration is also considering sending weapons to help Ukraine fight the Russian-backed rebels. Ukrainian leaders say they desperately need adequate weapons to defend themselves. Meanwhile, NATO plans to more than double the size of its response force in Ukraine from 13,000 to 30,000. ISIS militants are torturing and burying children alive in Iraq. According to a report by the United Nations, the Islamic State group is systematically killing, torturing, and raping children and families from the Yazidi sect and Christian communities. The UN Committee on the Rights of the Child has received reports of several cases of mass executions of boys. There are also reports of children being beheaded, crucified, and buried alive. The UN is calling on government forces there to do more to protect children and their families. In Central Africa, 3 militaries using ground troops and warplanes have been fighting the radical Islamic group Boko Haram on at least 2 fronts this week. Hundreds of the Islamic fighters there are now reported dead. The battle against Boko Haram is taking on a growing international perspective. More African nations have joined the fight against them since their violent jihad began spilling across borders. The strike comes less than 2 weeks before presidential elections in Nigeria, where many Christians have been targeted, attacked, and killed by Islamic militants. The federal government is taking an unprecedented step to regulate the internet, just like they do phone service. The Federal Communications Commission is now pushing for something called net neutrality. Supporters say the government needs to make sure internet companies don't slow down web traffic by giving priority to big websites like Amazon or Netflix. But conservatives say the internet is working just fine, and they worry net neutrality could morph into heavy-handed government interference that would stifle internet innovation.
Most Americans think that the government doesn't work so hot and the internet does. Why are we putting the government in charge of the internet? We're trying to say no. Let it flourish without government regulation.
The issue of net neutrality will likely head to federal court. Well, net neutrality is just the latest example of the spike in federal regulations under the Obama administration. In fact, those regulations are becoming so burdensome, they're weighing down the American economy and costing you more money than you spend on food and clothing. Paul Strand has more.
You are not worthy to receive these 10 commandments.
When God sent Moses down from the mountaintop, it was with just 10 commandments. But the federal government obviously thinks we need a lot more, leading Wayne Cruz to call his report on their proliferating 10,000 commandments.
So I picked 10,000 commandments, but now, of course, we've got a lot more than 10,000 commandments because we've had 88,000 regulations just in the past decade.
Cruz documents all this from his position at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. He says there are more federal regulations on the books than most humans could ever read.
The Federal Register this past year was 79,000 pages. Imagine that, 79,000 pages of rules.
The costs are real and substantial. Cruz says just look at how Obamacare's dictates are already affecting businesses.
It's been all over the news about Obamacare and how companies are either downsizing, job formation rates are much lower, companies are putting their employees on part-time basis rather than full-time. So regulation is a heavy load.
Cruz figures federal regulations cost the economy a whopping $1.9 trillion a year, an eighth of the country's GDP. But let's make it personal. It costs your household almost $15,000 a year.
And if you think about the average family income of about $65,000 in that neighborhood, it's around 23%. It's the biggest item in the family budget, if you think of it that way, except for housing. It's bigger than entertainment, food, everything else.
It's the federal agencies spewing them out, some 3,600 regulations in an average year. And Cruz says the very most expensive kind, what are called economically significant rules, are growing especially fast.
That doesn't mean a little bit of money or it just might bother you a little bit. An economically significant regulation is one that officially is designated to cost $100 million a year.
Many are saying it's time to question whether the benefits of rules and regulations are worth the lost jobs, lost growth, and nearly $2 trillion they shave off the American economy every year. But Cruz warns, as the nanny state grows ever bigger and takes more and more control of Americans' lives, the biggest cost to them may be in things not so easily measured.
And one thing that we never measure is loss of liberty. What is the cost of losing our liberties?
Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
Another victory for a religious organization challenging Obamacare's contraception mandate. A federal judge in Florida has granted the Christian and Missionary Alliance Foundation an injunction allowing them to stop paying for controversial birth control in their health benefits plan. The order is the latest since the U.S. Supreme Court ruled last year that some businesses can be exempt from the contraception mandate if it violates their religious beliefs. Lawmakers in California are proposing legislation that would make it harder for parents to opt out of vaccinating their children. The measure would no longer allow parents to cite personal beliefs or religious reasons to send unvaccinated kids to private and public schools. The move comes after a measles outbreak where dozens of people were infected. Health officials believe it began in Disneyland. Well, if you have Anthem health insurance, you may have gotten an email today saying your personal information was compromised. The nation's second largest health insurer says hackers infiltrated their computer systems, but did not say exactly how many people were impacted. The stolen information included names, birth dates, email addresses, and employment details. The FBI is investigating. Coming up, dire predictions about where France is headed with radical Islam on the rise. Stay tuned for a CBN News exclusive from Paris on French national suicide. The King of Jordan is promising a, quote, harsh war against ISIS. The move comes after militants burned a captive Jordanian pilot in a cage, then released a video of the killing. King Abdullah consulted with military chiefs Wednesday after cutting a U.S. trip short. Jordan is part of a U.S.-led military alliance that has been bombing militant targets in Syria for nearly 5 months. Islamic terrorists killed 17 people in France last month, but did those attacks serve as a wake-up call? Or is the government there still asleep? Some people in France say their leaders are still hostages to political correctness, and they are even worried about the possibility of a civil war. Dale Hurd brings us this shocking story from Paris.
French Holocaust survivors at the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. These men and women who saw such terrible anti-Semitism as children must now, at the end of their lives, face a time when a lot of Europeans want to kill Jews again. France's Jews have felt like a target for a long time, and the killings here at the kosher supermarket have only confirmed their worst fears, and it will cause more of them to leave. Some have called the Charlie Hebdo and kosher supermarket killings France's 9/11. But America clearly changed after 9/11. It's not at all clear if France has changed. Yes, there have been arrests, and more police and soldiers deployed. But political correctness is still so deeply rooted in France that speaking out too strongly against Muslim immigration and being labeled a racist can end a career. French commentator Eric Zemmour was fired last month for saying that Muslims should be deported to avoid chaos and civil war. Zemmour has written The French Suicide, about how France is being destroyed. We had hoped to interview Zemmour, but his publicist told us he was in hiding because of death threats. A protest march by this anti-Islamization group a week after the killings was banned by police. Even popular far-right leader Marine Le Pen has been tiptoeing around the subject of Islam. She's reportedly feuding with her foreign policy advisor, Emmerich Choprada, who gave an exclusive interview to CBN News. Choprada angered Le Pen by saying France is at war with some Muslims and in danger from what he called a fifth column of 1 million radical Muslims in France.
But the problem, which is maybe worse than this terrorist network, is the sympathy from a large part of the Muslim population in France towards the jihad and towards the radical ideas. I do not say that all the Muslims are violent, but I say that violence is rooted in Islam holy texts.
The world saw millions of Frenchmen pour into the streets to say, "I am Charlie." It was a touching outpouring of support for free speech in the face of Muslim terror. But conservatives in France saw something else: hypocrisy. The same French leaders marching for free speech who have not allowed free speech critical of Islam, except for a few Charlie Hebdo cartoons. The same French leaders whose policies have allowed Muslim extremism to flourish in France.
We don't have the freedom to say that the ones who are demonstrating are the ones responsible for what happened.
French author, journalist, and publisher Jean Robin says flatly the government brought on the attacks by being harder on critics of Islam than on Muslims.
The people who are responsible for these attacks are the ones showing off now and demonstrating for freedom of speech, which they crushed year after year.
In fact, when I asked French writer Renaud Camus about the French government's commitment to free speech, he laughed.
The government defends free speech? No, the aim of the government in the last 40 years has been to impeach free speech to express itself on the main subject, which is the change of population, which is totally banned from the media, which is what you are not allowed to say.
Camus has been banned from French media because of his outspoken views on the risk from Islam. And the French government's unwillingness or inability to effectively deal with the problem of Muslim immigration and radicalism could help ensure that there are more attacks like the one on Charlie Hebdo and the kosher supermarket. The words on the lips of those we interview were civil war.
I see civil war, and I'm not a prophet, you know. It's obvious, it's Lebanon.
Civil war, I mean civil war, that's clear.
Civil war, as terrible as it would be, civil war is the wrong expression, there would be nothing civil about it.
After what should have been a clear wake-up call for France, it's not at all clear that France will do what it takes to prevent the next attack.
We have to fight very firmly, very strictly against the Islamization of the French society. There is an Islamization process, and we have to stop it clearly.
The #1 best-selling book in France now is Submission, set in the future when France has a Muslim president and French women begin wearing veils. It was released, coincidentally, on the day of the Charlie Hebdo massacre. There is now a genuine fear and loathing in France that there will be more and more attacks like this because there are simply too many Muslim jihadists in the country to stop it. Dale Hurd, CBN News, Paris.
Up next, churches are supposed to be safe havens, but they're turning into targets. See what some groups are doing to keep you safe on Sunday. A church is meant to be a place to worship God and a sanctuary from the evil in the outside world. But today, churches in America are becoming targets for protests, predators, violence, and maybe even terrorists. Chuck Holton brings us this look at what churches can do to keep their members safe.
Of the many churches in Memphis, Tennessee, The largest is Bellevue Baptist Church. Founded in 1903, it's since grown in membership to almost 30,000 people. Andy Willis has been given the monumental job of keeping this large congregation safe.
So today, churches that speak the truth, that teach and preach true biblical principles, they draw a lot of attention because there are a lot of components of society today that don't want to hear that are absolutely against that. As a church security team, we have to be prepared for those kinds of situations to intervene and to protect the flock.
More than 100 paid and volunteer security staff respond to events every week.
Today, what we've got is we've got 2 undercovers. You can see the one there.
Working quietly behind the scenes to safeguard their members.
Obviously, everybody has issues. Church is the place to bring your issues. In the security department, it's our job to have discernment to determine which of those issues are dangerous to others. And if we make that determination, what we do is we try to intervene in a meaningful way, point them at the right resources to help them.
One of the resources that helps Bellevue prepare is church security consultant Tim Miller.
It could be coming from here, right? Where else?
A former Secret Service agent, Miller says the threat is rising worldwide.
Violence against Christians is rampant around the world. It hasn't necessarily touched us at the level it has other places. But if we think we're immune from that, we're sadly mistaken. We will begin as a nation to experience that same level of violence, and actually that same methodology is coming to the United States. The question for us is, are we going to be prepared to address it? You're going into a place where broken people are going to be meeting every week, broken people like me. And we need to be mindful that that security that we're providing needs to be ministry-based, but it needs to be every bit as good.
The church I went to as a kid only had about 200 people, and we knew everybody that came through those doors. But when you've got a church this size, this is almost like a civic center. And it's hard to imagine the challenges that would go with trying to keep this many people safe and keep an eye on everybody at the same time.
A camera system that constantly monitors and records activities on campus is extremely important. They're not very expensive, and the thing that you get is you get the protection in a liability situation that you won't have if you don't have it.
The fact of the matter is security is mostly what you do not see. So that's where for places that have large gatherings of people, it's really important that they have a professional security team that's helping them to plan and organize, because no organization has unlimited resources.
Children's programs have to be especially vigilant. At Bellevue, a computerized system prints labels for each kid and even keeps track of food allergies and medications. A big part of church security is responding to routine medical emergencies. Bellevue's security team includes nurse and paramedic Shelley Trigg.
We work very closely with the security department. This is staffed with a first aid person here and with immediate response. We are trained to take the trauma bag with us. We have everything here from aspirin to a gunshot wound kit.
Heaven forbid that there should be a tragedy at your church, but if it does happen, one thing's for sure, that very soon thereafter there'll be satellite trucks and media standing out on your front lawn. Here's my advice. Don't keep them in the dark. They've got to do their job. Designate somebody to come out and give them the information you have. You don't have to give away names, you don't have to give away anything that you don't want to, but it is important that you have a plan for how to deal with the news.
The biggest thing that makes me cringe whenever I speak to other churches about security is they will say, we don't have security. We're just praying that nothing happens. So when I hear that, I think it's like my son saying to me, hey, I've got a big test tomorrow, but God already knows the grade I'm going to get, so I'm just going to leave it up to Him. It's important for us to understand that while we are to trust God, God has a big part for us to play in His plan.
At the end of the day, they need to marry faith with wisdom and action. It is time for Christians to become educated about what's going on in the world, to be prayerful, and then to be prepared. And those things will make a difference when it begins to occur.
From Memphis, Tennessee, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
Well, the Bible certainly commands us to love and serve the poor, but most of us want to be sure we're getting plenty of bang for our bucks that go to help them. CBN News talked with some folks who aren't just rescuing the poor, but helping them to become rescuers themselves.
Believers know they're supposed to help the poor, but often feel challenged about how to do that so it has lasting impact. Opportunity International at this event in Washington suggested one of the best ways is to offer microfinancing, especially to women mired in poverty. The organization's been a conduit for almost $9 billion in loans to more than 12 million people across 22 countries. Their CEO, Vicky Esquerra, says they want to do so much more.
We have a goal of creating 20 million jobs by 2020, which will affect 100 million people.
At this lunchtime talk, they laid out why Christians would be wise to use their resources to aid entrepreneurial women in the third world. Esquerra points out they frequently do more with the loans than men might.
Out of every dollar they earn, they reinvest 90% of their income back into their families. So they are really focused on improving not only their lives, but the lives of their children, the health of their communities, and the health of their countries.
The emphasis here is that if you help people develop jobs and businesses, not only does it pull them out of poverty, but it gives them the means to turn around and help others out as well. Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
Well, that's it for now on CBN News Today. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. And tell us what you think about the stories you've seen here. You can do that on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. We hope you'll join us next time. Have a great day, and God bless.